The stagecoach lurched violently as another gust of wind slammed against its wooden frame, and Willa Anderson pressed her gloved hand against the frosted window, watching the world outside disappear into a swirling white chaos that seemed determined to erase everything in its path. She had left Denver 3 days ago with such hope in her heart, heading toward California where her sister's family waited. But now that journey felt like a distant dream as the November storm raged with increasing fury. The other passengers had disembarked at the previous stops, leaving only Willa and the driver somewhere in the vast expanse of Nevada territory. She pulled her wool traveling cloak tighter around her shoulders, feeling the temperature drop with each passing moment. The coach suddenly jerked to a halt, throwing Willa forward against the seat. She heard the driver's boots hit the ground outside, then his face appeared at the window, wind whipping his dark hair around features hardened by sun and weather. He was young, perhaps 25 to her 22 years, with startling blue eyes that stood out against his tanned skin. "Miss, we cannot go any further," he shouted over the howling wind. "There is a line shack about half a mile east. We need to make for it now before this gets worse." Worse. Willa's voice rose with alarm as she looked at the wall of white surrounding them. "Trust me, miss. Grab only what you absolutely need. We have to move fast." Willa's fingers trembled as she reached for her carpet bag, pulling out an extra shawl and the small satchel containing her money and mother's silver locket. The driver pulled the door open, and the wind tore it from his grasp, slamming it against the coach with a crack that made Willa jump. "Take my hand," he commanded, extending his arm toward her. She grasped his hand, surprised by the strength in his grip as he helped her down into snow that already reached past her ankles. The wind stole her breath and she gasped, clutching at his arm. "Stay close behind me," he said, his mouth near her ear so she could hear him. "Do not let go of my coat, no matter what." Willa grabbed hold of his heavy wool coat with both hands as he began to push forward through the storm. The snow stung her face like tiny needles, and she squeezed her eyes nearly shut, focusing only on the dark shape of the man in front of her. Her feet were already numb, and she stumbled repeatedly, but each time his strong arm steadied her, pulling her forward. Time lost all meaning in that white void. It could have been minutes or hours before the driver suddenly stopped, and Willa nearly collided with his back. She blinked through the snow and saw the vague outline of a small wooden structure ahead. The driver released her hand and moved forward, shouldering the door open with considerable force. He turned back, scooped Willa into his arms as if she weighed nothing, and carried her across the threshold. The moment they were inside, the wind slammed the door shut behind them with a bang that echoed through the small space. Willa found herself standing in near darkness, shivering so violently her teeth chattered. She heard the driver moving around, then the scratch of a match. A small flame flickered to life, illuminating his face from below as he lit a lantern that had been hanging on a nail near the door. The shack was smaller than her bedroom back in Denver. A single room with a pot-bellied stove in one corner, a narrow cot against the far wall, a rough wooden table with 2 chairs, and shelves that held a few supplies. But it was shelter, and right now that made it more precious than any palace. "Ben Oakley," the driver said suddenly, removing his hat and shaking the snow from it. "Most folks call me Ben." "Willa Anderson," she replied, her voice still shaky. "Thank you for getting us here safely, Mr. Oakley. Ben, please." He moved to the stove, opening it and checking inside. "There is kindling. Someone has kept this place stocked, thank God. We need to get a fire going before we both freeze." Willa watched as Ben worked with practiced efficiency, arranging kindling and striking another match. Soon a small flame was crackling inside the stove, and he began adding larger pieces of wood from a box beside it. The warmth was still minimal, but the sight of the fire brought Willa a comfort she had not realized she needed so desperately. "How long do you think we will be here?" she asked, moving closer to the stove and holding her hands toward it. Ben's expression was serious as he met her eyes. "That depends on the storm. Could be a day, could be longer. Winter storms in these parts can last for days, and we will not be able to move until it passes, and the snow settles enough to make travel possible." The reality of the situation settled over Willa like a heavy blanket. She was alone in a tiny cabin with a man she did not know, stranded in a blizzard with no idea when rescue might come. Her reputation would be in tatters if anyone found out. But the alternative had been freezing to death in that stagecoach, so she pushed those worries aside for now. "Is there food?" she asked practically. Ben moved to the shelves, taking inventory. "Dried beans, some salt pork, flour, coffee, and what looks like a jar of preserves. Enough to keep us alive for a good while if we are careful." "Then we will manage," Willa said with more confidence than she felt. She unwound her wet shawl from around her shoulders and draped it over one of the chairs near the stove to dry. Ben looked at her with what might have been respect. "You are taking this better than I expected, Miss Anderson." "What good would panicking do?" Willa asked, though her hands were still trembling slightly. "We are here, we have shelter and supplies, and we are alive. Those are blessings worth counting." As night fell, the storm intensified. The wind shrieked around the shack, finding every crack and crevice, making the walls shake and the lantern flame flicker. Ben had insisted Willa take the cot while he made a bed on the floor near the stove, using his bedroll from the coach supplies he had managed to grab. Willa had protested, but he had been firm. "I have slept in worse places, miss. Take the cot." Now she lay in the darkness, listening to the storm and the sound of Ben's breathing from the other side of the small room. Despite the circumstances, she felt safer than she had any right to feel. There was something solid and dependable about Ben Oakley that she could not quite explain. The next morning, Willa woke to find Ben already up, feeding the stove and heating water in a dented pot he had found. The storm still raged outside, the windows completely covered with snow. "Good morning," Ben said when he noticed her stirring. "I am making coffee. It will not be fancy, but it will be hot." Willa sat up, smoothing her hair back from her face. She had slept in her dress, having no other choice, and she felt rumpled and disheveled. But Ben did not seem to notice or care. "Thank you," she said, standing and folding the thin blanket that had covered her. "Is there anything I can do to help? Can you cook?" Ben asked without judgment, just curiosity. "Yes, my mother made sure I learned," Willa replied. "Though I confess I am better with a fully stocked kitchen than trail rations." Ben's face broke into a smile, the first real one she had seen from him, and it transformed his features completely. "Well, let us see what you can do with beans and salt pork." They fell into an easy routine that first day. Willa took over the cooking duties while Ben maintained the fire, kept snow cleared from around the door, and made sure their limited supplies were rationed properly. They talked as they worked, sharing stories of their lives in careful, measured doses. Willa learned that Ben had been driving stage coaches for 3 years, saving money with dreams of buying his own ranch someday. He had grown up on a farm in Missouri, the youngest of 5 brothers, and had headed west seeking opportunity and adventure. His father had died when Ben was 16, and he had worked hard to help support his mother and siblings before finally striking out on his own. Ben learned that Willa had been a schoolteacher in Denver, that she was traveling to join her older sister in Sacramento after their mother had passed away 6 months ago. She spoke of her love of books and learning, of her dreams of perhaps opening a school of her own one day. Her father had been a banker who had died of influenza when she was 12, leaving her mother to raise Willa and her sister alone. "You must have been frightened when you realized we were stranded," Ben said on the second evening as they sat at the small table eating a simple supper of beans and cornbread Willa had managed to make in a skillet on the stove. "I was," Willa admitted, "but fear accomplishes nothing. My mother used to say that we cannot control what happens to us, only how we respond to it. Your mother sounds like she was a wise woman." She was. Willa felt the familiar ache of grief but smiled through it. "She would have liked you, I think. She always appreciated people who took responsibility seriously." Ben looked down at his plate, and Willa thought she saw color rise in his cheeks. "I am just doing what any decent man would do." "No," Willa said firmly. "Many men would not have thought to bring me to shelter. Many would have panicked or made poor decisions. You kept your head and saved both our lives. That deserves recognition." The storm continued through the third day with no sign of abating. The world outside the shack was nothing but white fury, and the snow had drifted so high against the walls that Ben had to dig a path just to reach the small lean-to where firewood was stored. Willa found herself watching Ben more than she should, noticing things she had no business noticing. The way his hands moved with such competent confidence when he worked. The kind patience in his eyes when he explained something to her. The gentle way he spoke, always mindful of her comfort and dignity despite their impossible situation. On the fourth day, the wind finally began to die down, though snow still fell steadily. Ben managed to force the door open enough to look outside. "It must be 4 feet deep out there," he reported, shaking his head. "Even when it stops, we will need to wait for some melting before we can attempt to reach the stagecoach, and longer still before any travel is possible." "How long?" Willa asked. "Honestly, could be weeks. Maybe longer." Ben closed the door and turned to face her. "Miss Anderson, I need you to understand what we are facing. We are well and truly stranded here until spring thaw makes the roads passable again." The full weight of it hit Willa then. Weeks, possibly months, alone with Ben in this tiny cabin. Her sister would be frantic with worry. Everyone would assume the worst, and when they finally did reach civilization, her reputation would be destroyed. No decent family would hire a school teacher who had spent months alone with a man, regardless of the circumstances. "I see," she said quietly, sinking into one of the chairs. Ben knelt beside her, his eyes earnest. "I give you my word, Miss Anderson, I will be a gentleman. Your honor is safe with me." Willa looked at him, at the sincerity in his face, and felt something shift in her chest. "I know," she said softly. "I trust you, Ben." His eyes widened slightly at her use of his first name, but he did not comment on it. Instead, he reached out and briefly squeezed her hand before standing and returning to his work. As the days turned into a week, then 2, Willa and Ben settled into a life together that was strange and intimate in its own way. They learned each other's habits and rhythms. Ben woke with the dawn, while Willa was slower to rise. She hummed while she cooked, old hymns from her childhood. He had a habit of running his hand through his hair when he was thinking. She always folded things precisely, while he was more casual about such matters. They talked for hours, sharing stories and thoughts on everything from politics to philosophy. Willa discovered that Ben was far better educated than she had assumed, having read extensively despite his lack of formal schooling. Ben found that Willa had a sharp wit and an adventurous spirit hidden beneath her proper schoolteacher exterior. "You really think women should have the vote?" Ben asked one evening as they played cards by lantern light, using dried beans as betting chips. "Why should they not?" Willa countered, laying down a card. "We are citizens. We pay taxes when we own property. We are affected by the laws just as much as men. What logical reason is there to exclude us?" "I cannot think of one," Ben admitted. "Though most men I know would say women do not understand such things. And I would say those men are afraid that women understand perfectly well and might make different choices than they would like." Willa smiled sweetly. "Your play." Ben laughed and shook his head. "You would have made a fierce suffragist, Willa Anderson." "Perhaps I still will," Willa replied, and realized with a start that she meant it. The future that had seemed so fixed before now felt full of possibility, despite their dire circumstances. Or perhaps because of them. December arrived with more snow and bitter cold. Ben had to be increasingly creative in stretching their supplies. He set snares and managed to catch 2 rabbits, which Willa turned into a stew that lasted them 3 days. They carefully rationed the coffee, making it weaker and weaker, savoring every cup. The close quarters and constant proximity were testing in ways Willa had not anticipated. She found herself acutely aware of Ben at all times, the sound of his voice, the warmth of his body when they sat near each other by the stove, the way her heart jumped when their hands accidentally brushed passing a cup or plate. She tried to tell herself it was just the circumstances, the forced intimacy of their situation. But she knew she was lying to herself. She had developed feelings for Ben Oakley that went far beyond gratitude or friendship. Ben seemed equally affected, though he fought to maintain proper distance. He never touched her unless necessary, always gave her privacy when she needed to wash or change her undergarments by the stove while he went to check the snares. He was unfailingly respectful, and somehow that made Willa want him more. On Christmas Eve, Ben surprised her by producing a small package wrapped in brown paper. "I made this for you," he said, almost shyly. "It is not much, but I wanted you to have something to mark the day." Willa unwrapped it carefully and found a wooden comb, smooth and polished, with her initials carved delicately into the handle. "Ben," she breathed, "it is beautiful. How did you?" "I have been working on it at night after you sleep," he admitted. "I found a piece of wood that was suitable in the lean-to." Willa ran her fingers over the careful carving, touched beyond words. "I did not get you anything. I have nothing to give." "You have given me your company and your courage every day," Ben said quietly. "That is gift enough." Willa looked up at him, and the air between them suddenly felt charged with something electric. Ben took a step toward her, his eyes dark and intense. "Willa, I should not say this. I have no right given our circumstances, but I need you to know." He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. "These weeks with you have been the happiest of my life, despite everything. You are the most remarkable woman I have ever met." "Ben." Willa set the comb down carefully and closed the distance between them. "I feel the same way." His hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing over her skin with infinite gentleness. "If I kiss you right now, everything changes." "Everything has already changed," Willa whispered. Ben lowered his head slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, but Willa did not want to pull away. She wanted this more than she had ever wanted anything. When his lips finally met hers, it was soft and sweet and full of barely restrained longing. Willa's arms went around his neck, and Ben pulled her closer, deepening the kiss. Heat flooded through her body and she pressed against him, wanting to be nearer still. His hands spanned her waist, strong and warm, and she felt cherished and desired in equal measure. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ben rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said urgently. "I know I have nothing to offer you right now. I am just a stagecoach driver with dreams of a ranch. But I love you, Willa. I will spend the rest of my life working to make you happy if you will have me." Joy burst through Willa's chest like sunshine. "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I will marry you." Ben kissed her again and again until they were both dizzy with it. They spent that Christmas Eve wrapped in each other's arms by the stove, talking about their future, making plans and promises. "I have some money saved," Ben said, playing with Willa's fingers where they were entwined with his. "Enough to buy land, maybe start with a small herd. It would be hard work at first." "I am not afraid of hard work," Willa assured him. "And I could teach school, help earn money until the ranch is established. We could build a house," Ben continued, his voice full of dreams. "Nothing fancy at first, but solid, with a real kitchen for you and a big window facing east for the morning light. Maybe near Vulture City in Arizona Territory. Land is cheaper there and the territory is growing." "A house sounds wonderful," Willa murmured, imagining it. "We could have a garden and children eventually." Ben's arms tightened around her. "I want all of that with you, everything." That night, they slept wrapped in each other's arms for the first time, sharing the narrow cot. It was cramped and uncomfortable, but neither of them cared. Willa felt safer and happier than she had ever felt in her life, listening to Ben's heartbeat beneath her ear. The winter deepened, and the world outside remained locked in ice and snow. But inside the little shack, Willa and Ben built a life together. They were married in their own private ceremony, speaking vows to each other before God with no witness but the howling wind outside. "I, Benjamin Oakley, take you, Willa Anderson, to be my wife," Ben said solemnly, holding both her hands in his. "I promise to love you, honor you, and cherish you all the days of my life, in times of plenty and times of want, in sickness and in health, until death parts us." "I, Willa Anderson, take you, Benjamin Oakley, to be my husband," Willa replied, her voice steady and sure. "I promise to love you, honor you, and stand by your side through whatever comes. I give you my heart freely and completely, now and forever." They kissed to seal their vows, and Willa felt the rightness of it in her bones. This was meant to be. Everything that had happened, even the terrifying storm, had led them to this moment. January brought a brief thaw followed by more storms. February was bitter and long, testing their patience and their supplies. They were down to the last of the flour, and the salt pork was almost gone. Ben spent hours checking and resetting his snares, bringing back what game he could find. Willa made the food stretch with water and creativity, her cooking skills improving by necessity. But through it all, they had each other. They talked and laughed and planned. They kept each other warm through the coldest nights. They shared their fears and their hopes, their pasts and their dreams for the future. "Tell me about your family," Willa said one afternoon as she mended a tear in Ben's shirt by the light from the window. The sun was actually visible for the first time in days. "My mother is strong as iron," Ben said with affection. "She had to be, raising 5 boys mostly alone after Pa died. My oldest brother Thomas runs the farm now, then there is James, Daniel, and Matthew. I am the youngest." "Do you miss them?" Willa asked. "Sometimes," Ben admitted. "But I needed to make my own way, you know. Being the youngest, I was always just little Ben following in their footsteps. Out here I can be my own man." "You are very much your own man," Willa said warmly. "A good one." Ben smiled at her, that special smile reserved just for her. "What about your sister? Will she approve of me?" "Margaret will love you once she gets over the shock of my arriving married," Willa laughed. "She is very practical and proper, but she has a good heart. She will see how happy you make me, and that will be enough." "I hope so," Ben said. "I know this is not how things are supposed to happen. You deserve a proper courtship, a real wedding with your family present." Willa set down her mending and went to him, settling in his lap. "I have exactly what I want. You are all I need." Ben kissed her tenderly. "I am the luckiest man alive." As March arrived, the weather finally began to shift. The storms were less frequent, and the temperature slowly climbed above freezing during the daytime. Snow began to melt in earnest, revealing brown earth that had been hidden for months. "It will not be long now," Ben said one morning, standing in the doorway and surveying the landscape. "Another week or two, and we should be able to attempt the journey back to civilization." Willa felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. She was eager to move forward with their life together, to write to Margaret and let her know Willa was alive. But this little shack had become home, a cocoon where only she and Ben existed. "What will we tell people?" she asked practically. "The truth," Ben said firmly. "That we were stranded together, that we fell in love, and that we married. Let them think what they will. We know what really happened here." "We will need to find a minister to make it official in the eyes of the law," Willa said. "First town we reach," Ben promised. "I want everyone to know you are my wife." By mid-March, enough snow had melted that Ben decided they could attempt to reach the stagecoach. He made the journey alone first, breaking trail and assessing the situation. When he returned several hours later, his face was grim. "The coach is there, but it is badly damaged," he reported. "The horses are long gone, probably taken by wolves, or they wandered off and died. We can salvage some supplies, but we cannot use it for travel." "So how will we get out of here?" Willa asked. "We walk," Ben said simply. "The nearest town is Elko, about 15 miles south. If we take our time and I break trail first, we can make it in 2 or 3 days." They spent the next few days preparing. Ben made multiple trips to the stagecoach, bringing back anything useful. He found Willa's trunk, which filled her with joy. She finally had clean clothes to change into and her few precious possessions. On March 21st, the first day of spring, they left the shack that had been their home for 4 months. Willa looked back at it one last time as they walked away. "Thank you," she whispered to the little building, to the shelter it had provided. The journey to Elko was difficult. The snow was still deep in places, and the going was slow. They had to stop frequently to rest, and they slept outdoors wrapped in blankets by a fire Ben built. But after the winter they had survived, this seemed almost easy. When they finally crested a hill and saw Elko spread out below them, Willa actually cried with relief. Ben put his arm around her shoulders. "We made it," he said softly. "We are going to be fine now." The people of Elko were shocked by their story. The stagecoach line had assumed both Ben and Willa had perished in the storm. Ben's employers had actually paid death benefits to his mother. The whole situation was complicated and messy, but the town minister agreed to perform a legal marriage ceremony once he heard their tale. "In the eyes of God, you were already married," Reverend Thomas said kindly. "But let us make it official for the law as well." So on March 25, 1878, Willa Anderson became Willa Oakley in a proper church ceremony with witnesses and a signed certificate. She wore a simple blue dress she had bought with some of her carefully hoarded money, and Ben wore a new shirt and had gotten a haircut. It was not fancy, but it was real, and Willa treasured every moment. They sent telegrams that day. One to Willa's sister in Sacramento, one to Ben's mother in Missouri. Then they sat down to make hard decisions about their future. "I received my final pay from the stage line," Ben said as they sat in the hotel dining room, the first real meal they had eaten in months spread before them. "With what I had saved before and what you have, we have enough to make a start." "Arizona Territory?" Willa asked. "Arizona Territory," Ben confirmed. "I have been asking around. There is good land available near Vulture City for homesteading. We could file a claim, start building. Then that is what we will do, Willa said decisively. They left Elko a week later, after outfitting themselves properly for the journey. They traveled by stage to the railhead, then took the train as far south as they could before completing the last leg by hired wagon. Vulture City was rough and wild, a mining town that had sprung up around a gold mine and was still growing. It was hot and dusty, completely unlike the snowy landscape they had left behind. But it was full of opportunity and new beginnings. Ben filed a homestead claim on 160 acres about 5 miles from town. The land had water from a creek and enough flat space for building and farming. There were also grazing lands for the cattle Ben planned to raise. They lived in a tent at first while Ben began construction on their house. Willa helped when she could and spent the rest of her time setting up a small school in town. She started with just 3 students, children of miners and ranchers who were hungry for education. By summer, the house had walls and a roof. It was simple, just 3 rooms to start, but it was theirs. Ben built the furniture with his own hands, the bed, the table, the chairs. Willa sewed curtains from fabric she bought in town and made their house a home. In July, a letter arrived from Willa's sister. Margaret had been frantic with worry until the telegram arrived. She was overjoyed that Willa was alive, shocked that she had married, and hoped to visit once the baby was born in September. "Your sister is having a baby," Willa said wistfully as she read the letter aloud to Ben. They were sitting on the porch he had just finished building, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "Maybe we will have one of our own someday soon," Ben said, pulling her close. Willa smiled against his shoulder. "Maybe sooner than you think." Ben pulled back to look at her, his eyes wide. "Willa, are you saying?" "I am almost certain," Willa said, her smile growing. "I have been feeling poorly in the mornings for the past 2 weeks, and I am late." Ben let out a whoop of joy and swept her into his arms, spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to stop. "We are going to have a baby," he said in wonder, setting her down carefully. "When? If I am right, late winter or early spring," Willa calculated. "February, perhaps." Ben knelt down and pressed his ear to her still flat stomach. "Hello in there, little one. This is your papa. I love you already." Willa ran her fingers through Ben's hair, overwhelmed with love for this man who had saved her life and given her a future beyond anything she had imagined. That autumn, Ben bought their first cattle, 6 heifers and a bull, using the last of their savings. It was a gamble, but one they believed in. Willa continued teaching, and the school grew to 7 students. She held classes in a room above the general store, teaching reading, writing, arithmetic, and history. As winter approached again, Willa found herself thinking often of that shack where she and Ben had fallen in love. She wondered if it still stood, if anyone had found it, if it remembered the couple who had sheltered there. "You ever regret it?" she asked Ben one evening as they lay in their bed, his hand resting on her now swollen belly. "Getting stranded in that storm, everything that followed." "Not for one single second," Ben said firmly. "That storm brought me you. How could I regret the best thing that ever happened to me?" "I feel the same way," Willa admitted. "It was terrifying and difficult, but it gave me you. It gave us this life." Their son was born on February 14th, 1879, during a thunderstorm that seemed fitting for a child conceived during a blizzard. The labor was long and difficult, but when Willa finally held the squalling infant in her arms, with Ben beside her crying tears of joy, she felt complete. "What should we name him?" Ben asked, touching the baby's tiny hand with one finger. "I was thinking William," Willa said. "William Benjamin Oakley. We could call him Will." "Will Oakley," Ben tested the name. "I like it. Hello, Will. Welcome to the family." Little Will was a healthy, hungry baby who kept them both exhausted those first few months. But they managed, learning as they went, supporting each other through the challenges of new parenthood. By the time Will was 6 months old, Willa was back to teaching part-time, bringing the baby with her to school. Her students adored having an infant in the classroom, and it taught them lessons about responsibility and gentleness that no book could provide. The ranch grew slowly but steadily. Ben proved to have a gift for ranching, and his cattle thrived in the Arizona heat. He hired occasional help during roundups and drives, slowly building a reputation as an honest, hard-working rancher. When Will was 2 years old, Willa became pregnant again. This time it was twins, a boy and a girl born in the summer of 1881. They named the boy Joseph after Ben's father, and the girl Catherine after Willa's mother. The house suddenly seemed very small, and Ben immediately began planning an addition. Margaret finally made her promised visit when the twins were 6 months old, bringing her husband Robert and their own 3 children. The sisters reunited with tears and laughter, and Margaret pronounced herself delighted with Willa's life and family. "You seem so happy," Margaret said as they sat together watching the children play. "When I got that telegram saying you had been stranded and married a man I had never met, I was terrified for you." "I was terrified too at first," Willa admitted, "but Ben is the best man I know. I could not have asked for a better husband or father to my children." "I can see that," Margaret said warmly. "The way he looks at you, the way he is with the children. You chose well, sister." The years flowed by like water. The ranch prospered. Ben eventually had a herd of over 100 head of cattle and had to hire permanent ranch hands to help manage them all. Willa's school became official, with the town building a proper schoolhouse and paying her a teacher's salary. They added 4 more children to their family over the next decade. Another daughter, Sarah, born in 1883. Twin boys, Daniel and David, born in 1885. And finally, another daughter, Emma, born in 1888, when Willa was 32 and declared herself done with childbearing. The house grew with the family, room by room, until it was a sprawling ranch house with a wide porch and that big east-facing window Ben had promised Willa all those years ago. There was a garden where Willa grew vegetables and flowers, a barn for the horses and a bunkhouse for the ranch hands. Corrals and fences and all the infrastructure of a successful ranch. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Ben took Willa back to Nevada. They had talked about it for years and finally made the journey. They hired someone to watch the children and took the train north, then rented horses to make the final journey. The shack was still there, weathered and worn but standing. They approached it hand in hand, silent with memories. "It looks smaller than I remember," Willa said softly. "Everything does when you look back," Ben replied. They went inside. The stove was still there, rusted now. The cot had collapsed. The table and chairs were gone, probably taken by travelers who had sheltered there since. But the essence of the place remained. "We were married here," Willa said, looking around. "In our hearts, if not by law. This was where our life together truly began." "Best decision I ever made," Ben said, pulling her into his arms. "Asking you to marry me on Christmas Eve." "Best decision I ever made saying yes," Willa replied, kissing him. They left a small carved wooden plaque that Ben had made, nailing it to the wall beside the door. It read simply, "This shelter saved 2 lives in November 1877. May it protect all who find it. B. and W. Oakley." Back in Arizona, life continued its steady rhythm. The children grew. Will, the oldest, showed signs of following in his father's footsteps, already helping with the cattle at age 12. The twins, Joseph and Catherine, were inseparable and endlessly energetic. Sarah was quiet and loved to read, often sitting with Willa in the evenings. The younger twins, Daniel and David, were rambunctious troublemakers who kept everyone on their toes. And little Emma, the baby, had everyone wrapped around her finger. Willa eventually retired from teaching when Emma started school, passing the responsibility to a younger teacher. But she continued to work with students who needed extra help, and she established a small lending library in town, the first in Vulture City. Ben became one of the most respected ranchers in the territory. He was known for his fair dealing and his willingness to help neighbors in need. When Arizona finally achieved statehood in 1912, Ben was invited to attend the ceremonies, representing the ranching community. As they aged, Ben and Willa's love only deepened. They had weathered every storm together, both literal and figurative. There had been hard times, dry years when the cattle suffered and money was tight. Years when sickness swept through the family and they nursed children through fevers, praying desperately. Willa had miscarried between Sarah and the second set of twins, a loss that still brought tears even decades later. But there had been so much joy too, watching their children grow and thrive. The pride when Will bought his own land and started his own ranch. Catherine's wedding to a lawyer from Prescott, a beautiful ceremony that brought tears to everyone's eyes. Joseph becoming a veterinarian and returning to practice in Vulture City. Sarah becoming a teacher like her mother. The younger children finding their own paths. On a warm spring evening in 1920, Ben and Willa sat together on their porch, the same spot where they had sat countless times over the decades. They were both in their 60s now, their hair gray, their bodies showing the wear of hard-lived lives. But their hands were still entwined, just as they had been since that first kiss on Christmas Eve so long ago. "You remember the blizzard?" Willa asked, though she knew Ben would know exactly which blizzard she meant. "Every detail," Ben said, "the way the wind howled. How scared I was that I would not be able to find the shack, that I would get us both killed. The relief when that door finally opened. I remember thinking you were so calm and capable," Willa said. "I never imagined I would fall in love with you. When did you know?" Ben asked. It was a question they had asked each other many times over the years, always with different answers. "I think I started falling the moment you carried me across that threshold," Willa said thoughtfully. "Like you were carrying me into our future. But I knew for certain on Christmas Eve, before you even kissed me, when you gave me that comb you had made." She still had that comb, kept carefully in a box with other treasures. She still used it sometimes, feeling the smooth wood and the carved initials. "I knew when you said we would manage," Ben replied. "That first night when you could have panicked or fallen apart, but instead you just accepted the situation and decided to make the best of it. I thought, this is a woman who can face anything. This is a woman I want by my side forever." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sunset. Around them, they could hear the sounds of family. Will was in the barn with his own sons, teaching them about horses. Catherine had come for dinner with her husband and children, and the grandchildren were playing tag in the yard, their laughter ringing out. The house Willa and Ben had built together was full of life and love. "We did it," Willa said softly. "That future we dreamed about in that little shack. We built it, we made it real." "We did," Ben agreed, "and it has been better than I ever imagined." He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. Willa leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, as steady and dependable as he had been 43 years ago when he pulled her through a blizzard. The storm had been the beginning. Those months of isolation could have broken them, could have been a nightmare they survived and tried to forget. Instead, they had been the foundation of a love that lasted a lifetime. The hardship had forged them together, creating a bond that nothing could break. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Willa thought about all the people they had become in the years since that November storm. Ben, the stagecoach driver, who became a successful rancher. Willa, the schoolteacher, who became a mother and pillar of the community. Two strangers who became one, building a future together from nothing but love and determination. "I love you," Willa whispered. "I love you too," Ben replied. "Always have, always will." And as they sat there together, surrounded by the family they had created and the life they had built, they knew that every moment of struggle had been worth it. The blizzard had stranded them together, but love had made them stay. By spring thaw, they had built a future. By the autumn of their lives, they had built a legacy. Years later, when their children and grandchildren would ask about how they met, Ben and Willa would share the story of the blizzard, about being trapped in a tiny shack with nothing but each other, about falling in love during the hardest winter either of them had ever faced, about choosing each other every single day for the rest of their lives. And they would always end the story the same way, with Willa's hand in Ben's, their eyes meeting with all the love of a lifetime shared. "Best storm I ever weathered," Ben would say. "Best journey I ever took," Willa would reply. And their family would see in their eyes the truth that had sustained them through every challenge, every joy, every moment of their long life together. That real love, the kind that lasts, is not found in easy times. It is forged in hardship, built in trust, and proven in dedication. It is choosing each other, over and over again through every season of life. The blizzard had brought them together, but love had made them forever.